Treasurer, Prime Minister and other frontbenchers out selling the budget today and yesterday. It has obviously focused on cost of living, which I think will be the big election policy that everyone wants to know about. I mean, it's everything from petrol to the price of fruit and vegetables, and also housing affordability. Jason Falinski, who holds the Liberal seat on the northern beaches of Sydney of Mackellar, is on the line. Good to talk to you again.
Nice to speak to you too, Steve. How are you?
I'm well. You've done a lot of work in various committees on this issue of housing affordability. The PM was asked on the Today Show yesterday by Ali Langdon what the government was going to do to solve rental affordability. The PM said the best way to support people who are renting is to help them buy a house. Over the last 3 years, we've got 300,000 Australians directly into their own home. Ali wasn't happy with that. She said, I'm not talking about home ownership, I'm talking about rental relief. Do you think the PM understands that there are millions of Australians, Jason, who simply are never going to be able to afford to buy a house?
Mate, I know he does. That's why this federal government has spent record amounts of money on public housing with the National Housing Agreement with the states. When he was Treasurer, he spent an inordinate amount of time trying to ensure that the states were using that money appropriately and properly to build more housing for people who will never be able to avail themselves of the private market. So, I mean, for people to suggest otherwise means that they're just not looking at his record over a long period of time.
He went on to say, look, my point is people who are buying houses are renters. I think the social housing aspect is largely handled by the states with the encouragement and funding of the federal government. I agree, Jason. But what about the issue, particularly in regional parts of Australia, where the rental prices have gone through the roof? Is there any government does the government have any ability to impact itself with policy on those problems?
Well, mate, I've got to tell you, there are about 8 or 9 trigger words in there for me. You're absolutely right in what you're saying, and so is Ali, frankly. But the fact of the matter is, the reason that we now have a challenge in or raising rental prices, particularly in rural and regional areas, is because we don't have enough supply. And we have spent the last 20 years blaming immigrants and investors and foreign buyers for high home prices in Australia and for our falling home ownership rates. Like, the reason we want affordable houses is not just, it'd be nice to have affordable houses. It's so young Australians can live in a home they own. And the same with people who are renting. You know, people who now feel like, I'm going to rent for the rest of my life. Which is what Daniel Andrews said just the other day. The Labor Premier of Victoria said, young Australians have given up on owning a home. Let's be very clear what that means. That means that one of the core principles on which this nation was built, the Labor Party is giving up on, which is home ownership. And the important thing about home ownership is that it actually makes us a fairer nation. If you own your own home, or if you have widespread home ownership, you have lower levels of wealth inequality. That equals a fairer nation. So when Ali asked about rents in Australia, the reason is quite simple. We have not been building enough rental supply for young Australians to be able to rent a property. And when during COVID people moved to rural and regional areas, there wasn't enough supply there. So rents have gone through the roof. And this at a time when we haven't had foreign students, when we haven't had immigration, and when we've had record low levels of investors. So I say to those people criticising the Prime Minister, most of you are the ones who created this situation by criticising the very people who are creating the circumstances of keeping rent down. And the other one, of course, is negative gearing. Without negative gearing, rents would be through the roof. And yet every day I hear from some, local galah who's become an instant expert on housing affordability, how the problem is negative gearing. Well, let me tell you, get rid of negative gearing and there's one thing you will do. You'll make rents even more unaffordable in Australia.
You will. You might drop some of the real estate high prices, though, by doing that if you take the investors out of the market. Well, I'm not in favour of market intrusion. I think the market should be allowed to run as the market sees fit. And I think your supply argument's absolutely correct, and it comes back to local councils in many cases and planning. But if you take negative gearing out, will you not put a dampener on, rising real estate prices?
So that was something I was very interested in because, on one hand, the benefits of negative gearing are diverse range of ownership. So when you go to countries like the UK, US, Germany, most rental properties are owned by one or two very large companies. In Berlin, they just had a referendum where the people of Berlin voted in overwhelming numbers for the local city government to buy 320,000 rental apartments from one company because they were doing such a bad job. The benefit we have in Australia is you got mums and dads owning most of our rental stock. But we went and had a look at the econometric analysis to see what impact does negative gearing have on prices. And the answer is, in most parts of Australia, it's negligible. It's very close to 0%, 0.1, 0.2. For apartments close to the city, to CBDs, it can be up to 4% with the capital gains tax concession as well. So if you got rid of those two tax incentives in property, you would probably reduce inner city apartment prices by about 4%. But in terms of apartments in rural and regional areas, you wouldn't even notice the difference.
What about housing stock, though?
Housing stock, the impact of negative gearing on detached houses was once again very hard, and capital gains tax concession was once again very hard to measure. It is overwhelming. Negative gearing and the capital gains tax concessions are overwhelmingly used by investors, mums and dads, nurses, police, all sorts of people in Australia.
I hear that line, Jason, but I mean, do we know too many nurses and police who are property investors? I mean, seriously.
Oh yeah, we've got over 100. We've got over 150,000 of people utilising or using. Sorry, I hate that word, utilising. Using negative gearing, fall into three professions: nursing, policing, and one other which I forgot. But they're like average Australians on salaries and wages. Just putting some money aside for their retirement. And
so I know there's
I
know there's no golden, solution to this. There's no one solution, and you've done excellent work on it. But I mean, how do we? Is there government intervention available that's going to make it easier for people in regional areas to rent? Now, it's well and good to say let's build more houses. I mean, that's not going to happen quickly, is it?
Well, no, it's not. But we didn't just get into this problem. I mean, this has been a problem 40 years in the making. So we are short about 400,000 houses in Australia at the moment, and that's because for a long period of time, we have been underbuilding in Australia by about 20 to 25,000 houses a year, and that's why we've got this problem. During the pandemic, when everyone was moving into rural and regional areas, Coffs Harbour ran out of zone land on which they could build more housing and apartments. They wrote to the Department of Planning in Sydney and said, well, we need more zone land. The Department of Planning said, well, that process is 7 years. That's the problem.
7 years?
7 years. That's the problem there. If you've got a 7-year process, it means you can't respond to these things. And some of the phenomena that we're observing in home prices, you've observed it everywhere in the world. So Dallas, that has a very flexible planning system, their house prices went up 20% over 2 years. But in Sydney, we saw it go up nearly 40%.
It's an issue that we'll continue to talk about. You are doing outstanding work in it. It's going to be part of the election campaign, I've got no doubt. Just before you go, you are a New South Wales Liberal MP. Senator Concetta Fierravanti-Wells has taken a big stick to the Prime Minister, called him a bully, said he was dysfunctional and doesn't deserve to be Prime Minister. I know she's got her own reasons for that. She's not been pre-selected on the Senate ticket or been dropped to an unwinnable spot. That's not helpful in the lead up to an election, is it?
It's very unhelpful, Steve. And it's very unhelpful for her to do it yesterday or the day before. Look, in every team, there are things that happen that you're not happy with. But the point about being in a team is you work together to get the result, not just for the team, but for the people of Australia. So it was disappointing Concetta decided to do that.
Thanks for your time. Good luck. We'll talk to you next week.
Thanks, Steve. Really appreciate it. Bye, mate.
Jason Falinski.